Picture this. You are on the road trip of a lifetime, driving through one of the most remote, desolate places on the entire planet. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger flags you down for help. What happens next is straight out of a horror movie, but for one young British couple in the Australian Outback, it was terrifyingly real. Today we're breaking down the truly chilling mystery of the murder of Peter Falconio. These are the words of Joanne Lees, the sole survivor of the attack. I mean, that statement just cuts right to the bone, doesn't it? It captures the absolute terror she must have felt on that lonely highway, miles and miles from anyone or anything. It was a single moment that would change her life forever and trigger one of the biggest manhunts in Australian history. But before all the horror, there was this incredible adventure. Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees had packed up their lives in the UK for a massive trip around the world. They'd explored Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, you name it. They finally landed in Sydney, bought this classic orange Kombi van, and just set off to see the entire continent. And then, July 14th, 2001, the day their dream journey turned into an absolute nightmare. So, to really get our heads around this case, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the attack itself. Then, we'll look at the bizarre turn where the only witness, Joanne, actually came under suspicion. We'll follow the police as they hunt for a phantom attacker, see how a suspect finally emerges from the shadows, look at the incredible DNA evidence that sealed his fate, and finally, explore why, even with a conviction, this case still feels so unfinished. Okay, first things first, let's set the scene. We're on the Stewart Highway, way north of Alice Springs. This is a vast, empty stretch of road that just cuts right through the Australian desert. I'm talking the kind of place where you can drive for hours and not see a single soul. It's here, in the middle of nowhere, that this all went down.
So, as they're driving that night, Peter and Joanne notice this car has been tailing them for a while. Eventually, a green Toyota 4WD pulls right up alongside, and the driver is frantically gesturing for them to pull over. He tells Peter their van is shooting sparks from the exhaust pipe. So Peter gets out, walks to the back of the Kombi with the man to check it out, and he asks Joanne to rev the engine. She does, and then she hears a loud bang. And that, right there, was the trap. It wasn't some aggressive carjacking. It was this seemingly helpful stranger, pointing out a car problem. As Joanne later recalled, the whole conversation was just so normal, so mundane. No one could have possibly predicted that this simple exchange would be the last conversation Peter Falconio would ever have. Just seconds after that bang, the man was at Joanne's window pointing a gun right at her. He tied her hands with cable ties, punched her, and shoved her into his truck. But somehow, in this incredible moment of survival, Joanne managed to slide out and just scrambled into the pitch-black darkness of the bush. For 5 agonizing hours, she hid, terrified, as her attacker hunted for her with a dog, sometimes passing just inches from where she was hiding. Finally, she made a break for it, ran back to the highway, and flagged down a passing trucker. But Joanne's ordeal was far from over. I mean, her story was so extraordinary. It sounded like something from a movie. And with no body, no weapon, and a killer who had vanished into thin air, the intense scrutiny of the police, and soon the media, started to focus on the only person left, Joanne herself. The police even brought in Aboriginal trackers. Now, these are experts with an almost supernatural ability to read the landscape. They can spot the tiniest signs, a broken twig, a disturbed stone, things you and I would never see. But here's the thing. Even these masters of the bush found nothing. No footprints, no drag marks, not a single sign of Peter or the gunman. And this complete lack of evidence just added fuel to the fire of suspicion. So you might be asking, why were people so suspicious? Well, a few things just didn't add up for them. First, there was a critical 8-hour delay before police even set up roadblocks, giving the killer a massive head start. Then there was the fact that there was zero physical evidence of Peter. No body, no blood, no weapon. And under intense questioning, some small inconsistencies started to show up in Joanne's memories of the trauma. And here was one of the big ones that critics really latched onto. Initially, she told police the attacker pushed her into the back of his truck through a gap between the front seats. But that kind of four-wheel drive just didn't exist. When police pointed this out, she later admitted the trauma had clouded her memory. You can understand that, right? But for her critics, it was a detail they used to cast doubt on her entire story. So with all this doubt swirling around Joanne and no real physical evidence to go on, the police were basically left hunting a ghost. They had only 2 solid leads:
Joanne's description of that green Toyota, and a single grainy image from a security camera.
And this image, this became the public face of the killer. Just a few hours after the attack, a man matching the attacker's description was caught on camera at a truck stop in Alice Springs. Police released the footage everywhere, begging for the man to come forward, even just to clear his name. He never did. This grainy picture became the single most important clue in the entire manhunt. So the police just went to work. They blasted the sketch and the video out to the public. When the mystery man didn't show, they started cross-referencing owners of that specific type of Toyota Land Cruiser and chasing down every single public tip. From all of that work, they put together a list of 36 persons of interest, and on that list was the name of the man who'd ultimately be charged with the murder. And that name was Bradley John Murdoch, a truck driver, a drug runner, a guy whose whole lifestyle kept him on the remote highways of Outback, Australia. He fit the description, and he owned a similar vehicle. Suddenly, the ghost was starting to take shape.
Now, when police started digging into Murdoch's background, they found a really disturbing profile. He was a truck driver who smuggled drugs on the side, he had known racist, white supremacist views, and he had a long, long history of violence and involvement with gangs. He was exactly the kind of person who seemed capable of such a brutal, random act of violence.
And his criminal record more than backed it up. Back in the 80s, he got a suspended sentence for killing someone while driving dangerously. In the 90s, he went to jail for drunkenly shooting at people at a football game. And get this, incredibly, police actually interviewed him about the Falconio case in late 2001. But because they had no direct evidence at the time, no DNA sample was taken. A massive missed opportunity. So the big break in the case didn't actually come from the manhunt. It came from a completely separate crime. The key that unlocked the whole Falconio mystery came from one of Murdoch's own accomplices in a drug smuggling operation, who decided it was time to talk. And this is how it all finally fell into place. First, the informant, a guy named James Heppy, told police Murdoch was their man. With that lead, police did something really clever. They got a DNA sample from Murdoch's brother, which showed a familial link to DNA from the crime scene. That was enough to arrest Murdoch. And once they had his DNA, it was game over, a direct match. And the DNA evidence was just absolutely damning. Murdoch's DNA was found on the shoulder of Joanne Lee's t-shirt, right where he would have grabbed her. It was on the gear stick of their orange Kombi, and maybe most chillingly of all, it was on a set of homemade cable tie handcuffs that were found right there at the scene. He was scientifically tied to the victim, the vehicle, and the instruments of the crime. And the odds, they were just staggering. 1 in 150 quadrillion. That was the statistical probability that the DNA on Joanne's shirt belonged to anyone else on Earth. It was, for all intents and purposes, a scientific certainty. Murdoch's defense tried to argue it was just some accidental transfer, but against a number with 17 zeros, that argument just fell completely flat. So with that mountain of undeniable evidence, the case finally went to trial. The legal system was about to deliver its verdict. But for the family of Peter Falconio, real closure, true peace, that would remain agonizingly out of reach. On December 13th, 2005, a jury found Bradley John Murdoch guilty of the murder of Peter Falconio and the assault and abduction of Joanne Lees. He was sentenced to life in prison and won't even be eligible for parole until 2033. Justice, at least in the eyes of the law, had been served. But there is one giant, heartbreaking question that still hangs over this entire case. Where is Peter? To this day, Bradley Murdoch has never confessed. He has never revealed what he did with Peter's body that night out in the desert. And despite huge, extensive searches over the years, not a single trace of him has ever been found. And this really is the enduring tragedy of this story. These are the words of Peter's mother, Joan. For the Falconio family, the conviction of their son's killer just isn't the end. Their pain is constant, a wound that's kept open by a murderer's silence. All they want after all these years is to bring their son home.